I feel she was empowered, but I also think she was kind of without a rudder once she went to Hollywood. She kind of got in over her head, and I just think it was a different environment for her that maybe she wasn't prepared for. And I just think that she really didn't know how to navigate those waters. I think she may have thought it would have been as easy for her in Hollywood as it had been for her in New York City. But for whatever reason, I don't think that was the case.
I think her best bit is the 4-minute sequence she did on Starsky and Hutch, where she does a little comedy bit with Starsky. She has really good comic timing in that.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
Would you like to see a menu?
Well, that all depends. What's in the centerfold?
How about an 8x10 glossy of my 6'2" boyfriend?
How about that? Well, okay. How about 2 hamburgers, double order French fries, one of your super-duper chocolate malts, and a cup of coffee. Oh, how about you?
Glass of water.
Well, sweetheart, I guess it's just you and me.
Was that Bogey?
Yeah.
Keep practicing.
Christa did find a little luck breaking into the entertainment industry when she was in L.A. That was her scene from an episode of the hit show Starsky and Hutch. And here she is in one of several scenes in which she appeared in Wonder Woman.
Just stay out of my way, sweetheart. I'm going to be Miss G.I. Dream Girl and be in Jack's next movie. And anybody who tries to stop me better watch her step.
But outside of those 2 guest spots, additional opportunities were sparse. Sometime around this period, Stuart Duncan had cut her off, and Christa took a roommate by the name of Stephanie. But she still managed to mingle with the powerful and wealthy, including international financier Bernie Kornfeld, a controversial figure who was said to always travel with a harem of beautiful women at his side. Christa's daughter even recalls spending time in Bernie's mansion during one of her trips to L.A. to see her mother. Lots of powerful and wealthy people like Kornfeld gravitated towards Christa, but they weren't the only ones.
She knew the upper echelon in Hollywood. You know, she knew Warren Beatty and Ryan O'Neal, Jack Nicholson. She was friendly with Mick Jagger and people like that. And then on the flip side, she also knew a lot of dangerous characters who lived in the shadows. So it was a real dichotomy.
Sometime in 1976, Christa began consorting with people like Rudy Mazzella, a particularly shady character known for his crazed parties and for being a notorious drug dealer. Christa's roommate Stephanie told us that she introduced her to a handsome businessman also involved in moving drugs. Christa apparently spent the night with this man and witnessed an open safe filled with lots of drugs and money. After speaking freely with Stephanie about what she saw, Stephanie warned her to keep that kind of information to herself. This kind of thing isn't a game, Stephanie told her. But it was apparent to Stephanie that Christa possessed a level of naivete that could potentially compromise her safety. In Stephanie's words, Christa had no street smarts or survival instinct. Others viewed Christa differently.
It's almost like you're talking about 4 or 5 different people when you talk to people about her. On the one hand, she was described as a very, very strong woman, a very, very beautiful woman. On the other hand, someone would turn right around and say she was manipulative, always a liar. Someone else said she was the most trustworthy person I ever met. Someone else said she was incredibly loyal. Someone else said she would turn right around and turn against you. So literally, when you're getting all this information, sometimes on the same day when we were really into this and I was talking to different people, it sounds like you're hearing different people described.
It's clear that Christa used her sexuality to attain the life that she desired. But that wasn't so unusual, particularly in that time and in the environment in which she existed. But how far did this manipulation extend? Did she harbor more nefarious motives when she made those recordings of her sexual encounters with the powerful and wealthy? Or was her reasoning behind the making of those tapes more innocent?
This was not somebody that I would characterize as a really nice person.
True crime author Fred Rosen.
Not when she's doing what she's doing. I mean, look, think about it, okay? I mean, it's the whole taping situation. I mean, taping intimate encounters, that was way before people would do that for the purposes of making money. What was she using it for? Blackmail of some sort.
Writer Stephen Thompson.
It wasn't as easy to surreptitiously record people in those days as it is today. Today, you stick a little thing in your pocket, nobody has a clue. In those days, you got to carry around a big old tape recorder. So I don't know whether it was meant as blackmail material, although I don't know why else she would be saving it. But the thing is, why would she need blackmail material? She's never had a problem getting what she wanted from men. I mean, that was her whole thing all through her life. If she wanted something, she would find a man, and would she trade sex for it? Sometimes. But at the same time, that was kind of the way people did things in the 70s in that crowd.
I guess the theory was that perhaps she was, if she failed to make it big in entertainment, that she was going to write a book about her
That
exploit.
is one of the rumors, yeah. But I can't imagine anybody touching it in those days.
It's possible that Christa didn't have blackmail on her mind when she made those tapes. Her roommate told us that Christa allowed her to hear some of them. She never believed the tapes were made for the purpose of blackmail at all. Instead, they were meant to provide more of an ego boost, as if to say, "You won't believe who I've been with. You've got to hear this." Regardless, investigators suspect that the existence of those tapes and the journal that accompanied them are a possible motive for her murder.
We don't have anybody that just jumps out there and says that's our killer. You know what I mean? It's just not like that. I wish it was, but it's just not there. Like I say, at this point in my mind, almost everybody's a suspect.
Suck it to me, mama. Good evening, New York. This is the show that's bound to put more dips in your hips, more cut in your strut, and more glide in your stride. If you don't dig it, you know you've got a hole in your soul. And you don't eat chicken on Sunday.
That's the voice of Frankie Crocker, a disc jockey who achieved legendary status in the New York City area, and whose influence in the musical culture was so pronounced that he even coined the phrase urban contemporary. During a brief stint at a radio station out of Los Angeles, Frankie began a relationship with Christa. It became clear to her that a career in TV and film was a long shot at best, and with disco being all the rage at the time, she convinced Frankie to produce an album for her.
She supposedly was telling people that, she had blackmail material on him, and that's why he was producing her album when she was a nobody.
Christa was involved along with two backup singers named Debbie Danilo and Patty Collins, and a keyboard player named Blair Aronson was also on the session. But evidently it was a very contentious project.
The accounts of these recording sessions are so fraught with dysfunction that getting it all straight can be a dizzying proposition. Christa was sleeping with Frankie Crocker, but she was also sleeping with Patty Collins, one of the two backup singers in the sessions. We know this through first-hand accounts, and from one of the only audio tapes that exist from Christa's secret tapings of various sexual escapades. Now in the possession of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, this particular audio tape features a three-way, as Larry Brandenburg, the cold case homicide detective currently handling Christa's case, explained to us.
Yeah, that was with her and Patty and George Hamilton.
For those who don't know, George Hamilton is a popular film actor, known for his dashing good looks and seemingly permanent tan skin. His films include 1960's Where the Boys Are, Love at First Bite, and The Godfather Part 3. We reached out to Mr. Hamilton, but he denied us an interview. But this three-way encounter was further verified by true crime writer Fred Rosen, whose book on the Christa Helm case is titled Hollywood Homicide, The Unsolved Murder of Starlet Christa Helm. Mr. Rosen actually contacted George Hamilton and spoke with him about the contents of the tape.
I spent, I guess it was a day with the cold case squad in Los Angeles. They sat me in a like one of their, interview rooms, and they played me a tape recording. And on that tape recording was a three-way tryst with Christa Helm, George Hamilton, and her lesbian lover. And I wound up actually sort of establishing a pretty good relationship with George. He proved to be immensely helpful in understanding who she was. Had no problems in admitting to having been with her and the other girl, and actually he had some really interesting things to say about the relationship between Christa and the other girl. What George said was that, without any prompting on my part, was that he felt a particular tension between these two women, and he felt that there was something involving some sort of control that he felt that Patty was exercising over Christa.
Other members of Christa's circle remember Patty as being an intensely unpleasant, rageful, and jealous person. With that dynamic at play in the studio, it's no wonder that the musical recording sessions didn't amount to much, and that no evidence of what was produced during that time exists to this day. But the discord in the studio was not limited to Christa and the volatile Patty. Researcher Renee Thompson and writer Stephen Thompson.
During her music career, Christa ticked an awful lot of people off.
She seemed to be having an affair with this person to spite this person, while this person was having an affair with her to spite another person, all at the same time.
Christa's other backup singer, Debbie Danilo, was dating the session's keyboardist at the time. His name was Blair Aronson. Miss Danilo declined our interview request, and Mr. Aronson never responded to us. But they have spoken to other outlets over the years, and their accounts throw yet another mystifying wrench into the case of Christa's unsolved murder. Mr. Aronson testified that Christa and he slept together, and during their tryst, they saw Danilo glaring at them from outside the window. Danilo denies this event ever happened, but to Mr. Aronson's recollection, this encounter occurred in the early morning hours of February 12, 1977. Later that night, Christa Helm would be murdered.
Who'd want her dead? And why? You got to always go back to that. Motive, means, and opportunity. Because with somebody like this, with the lifestyle that she led, you've got so many curves going on the road. It's impossible to keep it straight unless you keep yourself straight at what you're looking for, which is to figure out who done it. Because the fact is, if the cops can do that, they can still arrest the perpetrator. It's not too late. This stuff happens all the time.
The official account of what occurred on the evening of February 12, 1977, or at least the one we've been told for the past 37 years, goes like this. Christa was at a party with her roommate Stephanie. They called a mutual friend, Agent Sanford Smith, and asked him to join them. He declined. Unsatisfied, Christa took Stephanie's car and headed to Smith's home around Lloyd Place in West Hollywood to get him to reconsider. As she exited her car, either making her way up to the front door or coming back from it, she was brutally attacked in the street. She suffered 22 stab wounds and was hit by an unknown object against the head. Her body was discovered by a passerby who was headed toward Smith's home. He approached Christa as she let out her last breath. Christa Helm was dead. She was 27 years old.
I remember it very vividly to this day. I was sitting in my kitchen, and the gal, who I call the nanny, the lady that got paid to take care of me in Vermont, was on the phone, and she wasn't generally really nice to me. And she pulled out some strawberry and some chocolate wafer cookies, and she put them in front of me, and she sat down, and she told me that my mom had been killed in a car accident. And, that was hard, but there wasn't a big hole in my life. I was kind of numb that night, and the next day I went to school, and we were all lined up in the back of the school, and it just kind of hit me all of a sudden that I wasn't going to go. It was 6 months shy of when I was supposed to go live with her. So it kind of hit me at school, and I fell apart and cried and freaked out. And about 2 weeks after that, someone at school had found a newspaper article with the true story about what had happened to her, and they were bringing it to school, and a teacher intercepted it. So I was pulled out of class that day. I didn't know what was going on. And the principal of the school at the time, actually, who was very involved in helping me and taking care of me, she was really sweet, took me out of the school and brought me out to McDonald's and had a whole conversation about bad people in the world. And I later learned that my mom had actually been murdered, but it was only because it came out in this article and a kid brought it to school that anyone decided I needed to know the truth.
As close as her and I were, I did not know of the day when she was murdered. I heard it like 2 weeks later. Some friend of mine had gotten hold of a tabloid magazine and called me and told me. And I said, no, that's not true. It's just not true. And I said, I would have known, and, I said, it's not true. I said, you know how they print that stuff. So what I did was I called his father, and, Darlene, it is true. I went over to his house, and I was screaming.
I got a call about 1 a.m. in the morning. I arrived at the scene. What we observed at the start was a considerable amount of blood in the street that had some tire tracks running through it, and a female body was laying in front of a house that had a parked car in front of it, and she was partially under the parked car laying on her side.
Detective Larry Gansey was a homicide detective for the LA Sheriff's Department at the time of Christa's murder in 1977. He was the original investigator in charge of her case. He is now 90 years old and long retired from police work. But the Christa Helm murder continues to haunt him to this day.
The information that we received on the call was that it probably was a hit-and-run situation. When we got there, it was obvious it wasn't a hit-and-run situation because there was a tremendous amount of blood in the street that had tire tracks running through it. In California, in a homicide investigation, even though you're a homicide investigator, you have no control over that body until the coroner gets there. The body belongs to the coroner's department, and a coroner investigator will come out. Well, when the coroner investigator got there, we found that Christa had no identification whatsoever on her, and of course we didn't know it was Christa Helm at that time. We went to the morgue with the corner, and the only thing we found was she was holding a car key clenched in one of her hands, and that was the only item we had that might give us some identification. So we took the key, and it was pretty late in the morning. We checked the area of the scene and found a car that the key fit.
That car, of course, was registered to Christa's roommate Stephanie. So for a brief time, investigators had reason to believe that Stephanie was the victim. Once they were able to contact Stephanie, though, they were made aware of the victim's true identity. As detectives began their investigation, they started with the most obvious theory. Was this a simple mugging? After all, Christa's purse was missing and hasn't been recovered to this day, so it stands to reason that it was taken from the scene. But a mugging scenario seems highly unlikely.
Well, the reason I think it's not a mugging is it took a lot of work to stab somebody that many times, to kill them in that way. That takes a lot of energy.
The current investigator in charge of Christa's case, Detective Larry Brandenburg.
It's just not easy. A person gets tired out stabbing someone that many times, in a violent rage like this. And, usually if it's a mugging, you're going to get what you want and get out of there quick. You're not going to spend that kind of time where you're actually so pissed off that you're taking this personal.
Clearly, Christa's murder was personal, but there is a highly probable reason why her purse was stolen from that scene, and it has nothing to do with any money she might have been carrying. It's said that Christa never traveled without her journal, the provocative listing of men she'd slept with over the years. That journal has never been found, so it's thought to have been in her purse that night. Early on in the investigation, detectives latched on to another theory, and this one tied in with the murder of a prominent Hollywood player, Sal Mineo.
Who's that?
Just a guy.
I shot up one of them.
No, it's all right. You didn't hurt him.
Those are not my friends. Make them go away.
Mineo was nominated for an Academy Award twice as Best Supporting Actor for his performances in Rebel Without a Cause and Exodus. At the age of 37, he was killed by a single stabbing to the heart as he returned to his apartment following a play rehearsal. His murder occurred on February 12, 1976, exactly 1 year prior to Christa's murder. Most strikingly, their murders occurred only 1 block apart from each other. A pizza delivery man by the name of Lionel Ray Williams was eventually arrested for Mineo's murder. But that didn't happen until after Christa's murder.
Detective Gansey was big on that angle. And that's okay, because the thing is, he was investigating.
Williams' wife had burned him on a warrant that was out of Michigan, I believe, and she turned him in on that warrant. And the tape recorded the conversations he had in his cell. That's the way he got convicted for the murder of Sal Mineo. Well, I asked them at the time if they would throw in any questions for us on the Christa Helm murder. And, of course, the DA absolutely refused that. He didn't want to contaminate what he was getting for his Sal Mineo case.
Detective Larry Brandenburg.
What do you make of the Sal Mineo connection? Anything?
No, nothing at all. Totally
Okay.
different crime. Yeah, that was discounted pretty early on, and it just same area. When Sal Mineo was stabbed one time, that was a whole different thing. That was a robbery stuff that was going on, and this is totally different. This is more of a passion thing. I mean, the way she was killed.
Our initial premise that the Mineo killer was also Christa Helm's killer was false. That pretty much put the case at a standstill, and that's why it became an unsolved up to this time.
She was my movie star mommy. Someone has been walking around for 30 years, having committed this heinous crime on my mother. I want to know what happened to her. My mom was killed February 12th, 1977. I was 9.
In 2008, wanting to spark renewed interest among the masses in her mother's unsolved murder, Christa's daughter Nicole convinced the popular CBS mystery series 48 Hours to devote an entire episode to her story.
The Last Take, tonight's 48 Hours mystery.
It was during that show that the public was first made aware of a startling connection. According to investigators, Christa's roommate Stephanie claimed that a man by the name of Tony Sirico came to her apartment and took various items from Christa's bedroom following the murder, including, she believed, the many audio tapes of her sexual encounters.
We know that after Christa was killed, Tony Sirico was sent to her residence to check on the welfare and watch over her roommate for a few days and to make sure that she was okay. According to the roommate, Tony Sirico removed some tapes out of Christa's room, never to be seen again.
Christa's roommate, who to this day is too frightened to talk publicly, also told detectives that Tony took some of Christa's furs and clothing.
If the name Tony Sirico sounds familiar, that's because he's best known today for portraying the character of Paulie Walnuts in one of the most beloved series of all time, The Sopranos.
What do you hear? What do you say?
License and registration.
How about if I give you one of these instead?
I'm wearing a vest.
Oh, yeah? If I shoot, it's going in your brajo.
You're a real sick fuck, you know that?
Daddy boy.
I know Tony knows something. I don't know what he knows. But, I mean, he was a real-life gangster from New York. And then he became this actor, of course.
In 1977, Sirico was a struggling actor trying to make his way in the world of Hollywood. But in the years prior to that, he was a thug in New York, around the same time Christa resided there. And he amassed a rap sheet which included 28 arrests and 2 stretches in prison. He was a known shakedown artist and thought to be an associate of the Colombo crime family. By all accounts, Sirico's criminal past is long behind him, and he's turned his life around to such an extent that he's become a respected member of the acting community. So why won't he cooperate with investigators?
When we went back to interview him, he, of course, had his, everything was pretty nice until we asked him where he was that day. And then his attorney said, this interview's over. And that was that. I mean, you can derive 100 things from that, but it certainly puts a red flag up when people do that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's our killer, but he certainly was not cooperative at all.
While Christa's roommate has declined interview requests from major media outlets over the past 37 years, she did agree to speak to us on the condition that we not tape her voice. When we interviewed Stephanie, we took extensive notes, wrote them up in script form, and submitted them to her for her approval. According to her, Tony Sirico wasn't the one who came to the apartment to take Christa's things. It was Lenny Barron, Christa's old friend from New York. Here's a section of the script where Stephanie recalls those events. The script is being read by a voice talent, but the content has been approved by Stephanie.
Lenny showed up after the murder and wanted to take some of Christa's belongings, including the clothes he designed for her. I gave him the audio tapes Christa had recorded. There were a lot of them, because I was still in shock and I didn't know what else to do. I didn't think the people on those tapes deserved to be dragged through the mud, so I gave them to Lenny for safekeeping. I don't know what wound up happening to most of those tapes. As for Tony Sirico, he had no interest in Christa. He was living in Lenny's house while he was trying to make it as an actor in L.A. After Christa was murdered, and knowing that I was frightened to be living alone in the apartment, Lenny found his excuse to kick Tony out of his place and sent him to stay with me to offer protection. Tony was very funny. He was very focused on his career at the time, and I'm happy for him and all the success he's found over the years. I am firmly convinced that Tony had nothing to do with Christa's murder.
Was it Tony who came to the apartment to take Christa's belongings, as investigators have been led to believe? Or was it Lenny? It's worth noting that many of Christa's belongings were recovered from Lenny's home following his death in 2003. But apparently, only 2 of the audio tapes remained in his possession. If Tony was involved in some way, he refuses to speak for himself in the matter, so his role in this story represents another frustrating dead end for investigators. But while Tony might not cop to any level of involvement in Christa's life or murder, there was another man who back in 1977 might have said too much.
As they dig deeper into the case, they find a startling confession of sorts.
Now, this guy bragged about doing the killing.
His name, Rudy Mazzella, and he was known for his anything-goes parties where Christa was a frequent guest.
He's a violent kind of guy. He was known to carry guns and knives. We spoke to his ex-wife, deathly afraid of him.
Rudy is a pretty big guy, pretty powerful and scary guy.
In this interview in July of 1977, a woman who frequented Mazzella's house told police what she had heard about him.
My boyfriend told me Rudy had told him that he had murdered Christa. He didn't give a reason, but he said that he had murdered Christa.
And was that followed up on back then?
They did question Rudy, yes. They questioned him. He denied any involvement in it. Rudy was the kind of guy that would brag about things that maybe he didn't do just to get some notoriety and to boost his standing with people.
With no other evidence tying Mazzella to the crime, the original investigators left it at that.
Was he serious? We don't know, because the person he bragged to is deceased, and so is Rudy, so we can't talk to either one of them anymore.
What can you tell me about Rudy Mazzella?
Well, he was a drug dealer, bad guy, and there was rumors that she was skimming some dope of his, and he was angry about that. So he was up there on our top list of suspects, obviously.
He had confessed to an acquaintance of his, and then he denied it when the police actually questioned him.
Yeah.
But I'd heard from your interview in the 48 Hour special. I realize this is years ago, and much more might have developed since I saw that special. But I understand that Rudy had a reputation for lying to make himself seem a lot more dangerous than he actually was.
Yeah, he kind of was a bullshitter. He liked people to think he was more of a badass than he was.
Yeah.
But he was kind of a nut, you know.
Rudy Mazzella, Tony Sirico, a jealous lover, Sal Minio's killer. And then there's Christa's possible connection with the mob.
Every step of the way through her story, from the beginning to the end, there is a vague mob thing going.
Writer Stephen Thompson.
The restaurant where she had her first job was reportedly run by the mob. The guy she married with the karate schools was reportedly connected to the mob. When she was in New York, she supposedly worked at a place that was connected to the mob. Her first movie was directed by Gerard Damiano, who directed Deep Throat, which was mob-funded. And then you've got the whole situation that came out with the 48 Hours, where the guy from the Sopranos cleaned out all of her stuff from her apartment.
True crime author Fred Rosen.
There's a tendency, whenever there is a mob connection, to think the mob might be involved. If that were the case, I mean, the mob has been into every with its tentacles, has been into every part of society. We all know that. But in terms of her doing something that would get them, use common sense, guys, okay? The mob does not execute by stabbing somebody 21 times. That ain't the way it works. It's 2 bullets in the back of the head on a lonely street someplace. Period. Let's move on.
And what about Stuart Duncan, Christa's sugar daddy in New York, who cut her off completely after her move to L.A.?
He was paying all the bills. And, of course, she was pretty promiscuous, and I think he found out that she was having affairs with all these other guys, and he's paying all the bills. and that kind of made him mad, so he quit paying the bills and threw her out of the house. And that's when she moved in with Stephanie. So we looked at him, but he was very forthcoming about the affair and everything. I don't know if his wife was aware of it. I think she was, to be honest with you. I really do, but I don't think it was him. I mean, the only other thing that we thought about, we haven't disproved it, is did his wife found out? Could have been her. That's something we haven't put to bed yet.
And what about Sandy Smith, the gentleman that Christa went to see after the party, and whose house she was murdered in front of? Even after all this time, we still can't say for sure why Christa went to that house, or what level of involvement Sandy might have played in her murder, if any at all.
Yeah, he was, I've gotten different pieces of information on this fella throughout the years. One was that he was, a casual lover of hers, and others were that he was her agent. I never met the fella. I have no idea. And from what I was told, the police went to interview him right after, and he said he slept through. He didn't even wake up when she came by the house. And in his interview, when I read the interview, it just kind of stuck out to me that he, immediately said, well, I didn't kill her. That came out of his mouth very quickly, and it kind of, the way that it fell into the conversation concerned the cold case detectives as well. But he disappeared shortly thereafter, and nobody could find him. Since I've been working on the case, nobody's ever been able to find him.
When he was questioned, he said that he was asleep and he didn't come to the door at all when she came to the house.
Correct. Which is kind of suspect because, from what we learned, I mean, I wasn't the original investigator, obviously, but from what the investigators had learned, talking to people that knew him and everything, he used a lot of drugs, sold drugs, and he cocaine and meth, and he was up at night. He was a party guy.
Yeah.
It wasn't like him to be asleep at that time of night unless he was just so intoxicated from drugs. I mean, I guess that's possible.
Sandy Smith, do you recall his excuse, what he was doing that night of the murder?
He said he was hard to wake up when you knocked on his door. And when we interviewed him, we asked about his cocaine connection with Christa. I said, well, what does she do? Buy it for you or repay you in favors? And he walked around that he wasn't connected with that at all. But during our conversation, the phone would ring a couple of times, and his first statement on the phone, could you imagine this? But the police are here with me. And the phone conversations would end.
Most of the people we interviewed believe that Christa's excuse for going to Sandy's house that night was drug-related. But during our interview, Christa's roommate Stephanie disagreed.
Sandy Smith was my friend, not Christa's. I doubt she would ever have any reason to contact him on her own, or that she had any reason to go to his house that night. He was a music agent who represented some big acts, and he dealt drugs as well. My guess is that they were probably partying so loudly in the house that night that no one heard Christa, and that she came to the door. Someone opened the grill, looked out, and didn't recognize her and shut it on her. Sandy convinced me to come over to his house not long after the murder. I was so petrified to be in the same place where Christa was murdered that I was near stroke. But he ushered me in, and there were a lot of people inside. Everyone was staring at me. Sandy broke the awkward silence by saying, I didn't do it, did you? I always thought that was odd.
Whether Sandy knew of Christa's existence outside of his house or not, there is another possibility as to why Christa might have been there that night. As we'll reveal in a few moments, mounting evidence suggests that Christa knew she was being followed. Perhaps Sandy's house was the closest safe haven she could find. For nearly 4 decades, countless theories have been manufactured and scrutinized. But so far, none of these theories have provided detectives with any firm answers. But then, a potential breakthrough. In the latter part of the last decade, aided by the advancements of forensic technologies, Investigators were able to sample fingernail clippings which were taken from Christa's body at the time of her death and perform DNA tests on them. The results were shocking and could potentially draw them closer in their quest to unravel the identity of Christa's killer.
The coroner had taken fingernail scrapings from Christa and preserved them and came up with, I believe it was 4 or 5 female DNAs.
The presence of female DNA under Christa's fingernails could be completely incidental and benign, but it's more probable that the DNA points in the direction of her killer, as those tracings suggest that Christa fought hard against her attacker.
My mom was a black belt, so I knew she wouldn't just be attacked and not fight back. She was also an incredible fighter in general.
Armed with this revelatory new evidence, cold case detective Larry Brandenburg set out across the country and tested every female who played a prominent role in Christa's life around the time of her murder. Remember Debbie Danilo, the woman who found Christa sleeping with her boyfriend the morning of her death? She tested negative. And what about Christa's intensely jealous lover, Patty Collins? That result was a bit more complicated. Detectives tracked down Patty, or at least they believed they did. But this Patty Collins denied ever having known Christa, or even having spent time in LA during that period in the 70s. They sampled her DNA anyway, and it too came back as a negative match. Cold case detective Larry Brandenburg.
Do you think that you found the right Patty Collins?
You know, she denies it. Her sister says that's her. She denies it. So, but it certainly wasn't her DNA, the girl that we did find.
And the DNA you refer to was under Christa's fingernail, which was preserved from the crime scene. How certain are you that that is indicative of whoever attacked her, that was a defensive kind of DNA left over?
Well, you know, that we can't say for sure that it is. It could have been from some previous contact. You know, that's the thing. We can't say that for sure that that's her attacker. I mean, it's a logical thing to assume, but we have to prove that. You know, that's assuming that's our killer's DNA. So if you take that away, then anybody's still a suspect. You know, could this DNA have been from a prior, some kind of consensual contact with another female? Yeah, it could have been. She was at a party that evening. But if we can identify who that person is, then, you know, we can work around it that way.
What's the kind of the veracity of DNA after 3-4 decades pass?
Well, I rely on my criminalists, the scientists, when they tell me we can get a good profile off this, or we got a good profile. If you find the person, we can give you a match. You know, we got a good DNA profile off of this substance DNA that they got on those nails. So now our task is to find one that matches it.
DNA samples have been taken from every female known to have close ties to Christa prior to her murder. All but one.
For my own peace of mind, I want to go take DNA from someone we've talked to more than once already. Just hadn't done it, but I think it's something we need to do. And then again, that's just to cover the bases.
Whatever the results of that particular DNA test turn out to be, one thing seems clear. Whether male or female, or both, a growing amount of evidence suggests that not only did Christa actually know her killer, but she was keenly aware that potential dangers were lurking right around the corner. Shortly before she was killed, Christa's lifelong friend Darlene received a postcard in the mail. It was from Christa, and it contained an eerily cryptic message that haunts Darlene to this day.
She said, Dar, I'm in over my head. I'm into some things that I can't get out of. Those were her words, and she said, if anything happens to me, if I didn't hear from her for a while, not to be, alarmed. And she said, but I have to go into hiding. And she said, if something would happen to me, you take care of Nicole.
But that's not the only indication that Christa's life was being threatened. Movie Geeks United inadvertently stumbled upon another clue never before revealed, during the course of one of our interviews. And this clue suggests that the threat against Christa emanated from New York, not L.A. It came from Kent Moran, Christa's friend in New York, as he brought up the name of another key figure in Christa's life, one that every other member of Christa's circle that we spoke to, including the investigators, had never heard before.
Did you go with her during the filming of Let's Go for Broke?
No, I stayed at home, and her best friend Denise went. I heard all about it. They had Denise, they put a bun, you know, those old-fashioned wig things to stick on top of your head, and they packed it full of coke so she could get through customs.
I've never heard the name Denise before. I haven't heard the name Denise before.
What now?
Who was Denise?
She was Christa's, at that time when I knew Christa, she was Christa's best friend. In fact, I forgot to mention her. She's another person that I did do a lot of, was in her company quite a bit. We went to the Hamptons together for a 3-day no-sleeper weekend.
Do you remember her last name at all, or no?
Yes, but I'd rather not say it.
Okay, because she's not mentioned anywhere in any writing about.
In fact, this is maybe important. I left for Miami in '74. I bumped into Denise in the parking lot of Miami-Dade. She told me in the parking lot that Christa was in some really deep shit way over her head, and she wanted nothing to do with it. But she knows what was going on. She didn't go into any detail, but she looked scared when she said it.
Mr. Moran eventually provided us with Denise's last name, but we were unable to track her down by the time this episode was ready to air. There's another clue that indicates that Christa not only knew that her life was in danger, but that she might have actually had an encounter with her killer in the hours prior to her murder. As we conducted the interviews for this episode, our understanding of the events of February 12, 1977, the night that Christa was murdered, began to come into focus, and we discovered details that were missing from that episode of 48 Hours, and from much of the online material we found on her case. It begins with the party that served as the prelude to the horror of that night, the one that was attended by both Christa and her roommate Stephanie.
The night of her murder, we were attending a very large party in the canyons. I don't recall whose party it was. Christa approached me with a funny, cloudy look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me it was nothing, but I could tell something had shaken her.
I remember Stephanie saying Christa seemed troubled and wanted to tell her something, but she kind of dismissed her.
Now, years later, I recognize her expression as the look of death. I was going to leave to spend the weekend at the beach with my boyfriend, so I gave Christa my car keys and she left.
Her car was parked rather abruptly. It wasn't parked properly, so I think someone was actually following her in a car, chasing her, following her, and she knew they were a problem by the way she parked her car actually up against the curb. So she got out of her car quickly.
So she knew that she was being followed that night. Was the tire blown out, or was there any indication?
Yes, the one tire was that hit the curb.
The evidence indicates that Christa did make her way up to Sandy Smith's front door. Whether anyone came to answer that door is unclear, but it is believed that Christa suffered her first stab wound to her back as she returned to her car.
The original stab wound was in her upper back. So that first stab wound, she had no idea anyone was behind her. And if you go to the site, it's a very dark, narrow little street, and where she was walking out of, somebody could have very easily been on the side of the building waiting for her to come out right on the street. And so that was the first stab wound. in addition to all of the ones on her body, her hands were very cut up. So she clearly fought very hard and was stabbed all over her hands. There were a lot of wounds on her hands from the knife.
While Sandy Smith claimed not to have heard anything at the time of the murder, others in the neighborhood did. Actor Jon Gries, who is best known now for playing Uncle Rico in the cult film Napoleon Dynamite, was just 19 at the time and living with his mother right down the street. He said he heard screams and stepped outside with a gun belonging to his father, who was recently deceased. He looked down the sidewalk and saw nothing, but detectives said that he would have actually witnessed the event, or at least its aftermath, had he stepped out a little further onto the street. And there were other ear witnesses in the neighborhood that night.
The reports in the neighborhood said that there were 2 female and 1 male voice heard yelling outside. And there were also, in my opinion, 2 different instruments, and a lot of the detectives feel the same way. There was a knife and something else, so she was bludgeoned and stabbed, and that they believe it was 2 people that did it.
Is it possible that there were 2 attackers?
It's possible, certainly. There was both blunt force trauma and a lot of stab wounds. It was extremely violent, which that kind of tends to dictate it's something personal, that she probably knew her killer.
Christa died partially tucked under the car directly in front of Sandy Smith's house. According to Stephanie, this car belonged to Sandy Smith's live-in girlfriend. The narrow street made for a particularly conspicuous location to commit a murder, so it's thought that the killers might have tried to push Christa under that car to potentially thwart the discovery of her body.
A man named Thurman Broom discovered the body. He was a character actor, African American, which was rare in those days. And he was supposedly going to Mr. Smith's party that night, that Friday night, and he discovered the body.
Stephanie told us that she knew Thurman personally, and that 1 year after Christa's murder, Thurman himself was brutally slain. Christa's murder scene was littered with large pools of blood, and tire tracks were found in close proximity to the body. Christa's purse was thought to be stolen by the killers.
That's the key to some of it. She had a purse with a distinctive logo on it, and that was missing along with the love diary, which multiple people had said she carried with her.
A few days after Christa's murder, Stephanie received a phone call in the middle of the night.
I hear you really like to party.
Who is this?
I'm a good friend of Christa's. She told me to call you.
Where are you?
Right up the street.
Stephanie never discovered the identity of the mystery voice on the other end of the phone. But after 37 years, so much of this story remains a mystery. Many of those closest to Christa, those who could possibly offer the most valuable insights and clues, are either long dead or long disappeared. Take, for example, one of Christa's closest confidants for many years, Lenny Barron. In the years leading up to his death in 2003, Lenny was popping up in the most unexpected places, like this gardening show that he co-hosted with actress Linda Blair.
Many years ago, Living Topiary started in France, and then along the way they incorporated flowers. Today, Lenny's going to show us how to bring them into our own homes.
In order to make a topiary, I've chosen roses and tulips and these big leafy green leaves. I'm wrapping raffia around this cluster here very tightly.
Can I help?
Sure, Linda, if you can just hold that bouquet there, I can tie it off. Thank you.
But even though he had custody of many of Christa's belongings following her murder, he never really spoke of her, not even to their mutual friends, Jeremiah Newton or Kent Moran.
Letty refused to talk about it, except that her killers were still out there. And The Let Sleeping Dogs Lie.
I think it was 1980. I visited Lenny. He had a very modest house next door to a Pioneer chicken takeout. What I thought was really strange was Lenny didn't show any remorse. And he had all of Christa's furniture, at least a lot of it, really stupid stuff, like her giant bed that she hand-painted the silk herself. But whatever he said about Christa was detached. He didn't show any remorse or surprise.
But for some, it's more important than ever to keep talking about Christa. It's the best way to keep her name in the public consciousness and spur detectives to remain vigilant on finding her killer.
I want people to know that she was a beautiful person, a beautiful and a smart person, and she had a lot of life ahead of her. To me, she was always my true friend.
It was very sad. I mean, the way she was ignominiously stabbed and then dumped under a car. She was so beautiful, and, you know, she wasn't a bad person. She was capable of great kindness. I hope they one day find who killed her and put her soul to rest. And the poor daughter, she, of course, can't find any kind of peace of mind until her mother's killers are found.
Christa's daughter, Nicole, is a mother herself now, and a grandmother. But her pursuit of justice for her own mother, the beautiful starlet who was savagely taken from this world before her daughter reached her 10th birthday, endures.
There's been a lot of pictures painted of her that she was this, hardcore, go after what you want, step on people, which, from what I'm told, she did do. But I also think that I really want people to take away that she was a kind, loving, wonderful mom. When I was with her, she was so good to me, and she was so kind, and she drew people. She just had a charisma and an energy that people that knew her never forgot her. I can't tell you how many people have come to me and given me beautiful memories and love stories around her. Well, and that's what I think I want people to remember. She had such goodness in her.